you gorgeous and sexy creature. Welcome to Practice Intimacy. This is the place to be to learn all about love, sex, and how to have the best relationships you possibly can. My name is Jamie Lynn, and what I want to share with you today is a philosophy from Non-dual Tantra. And the reason I want to share this is because it can help you so much in your relationship with your partners, maybe partners, who knows. And it can also help you in your life. So the reason why I was thinking about this today is my sister suggested that I watch Cobra Kai on Netflix. And I was like, okay, I'll watch it. And I'm actually really enjoying it. I'm finding that it's got enough of like emotional what am I trying to say? There's enough emotional development and processing happening that it's actually keeping me sort of enthralled, which is fun. But where I was just kind of thinking about Non-dual Tantra is there is a whole premise, at least to the first season, the first 5 episodes or whatever I've watched, where they're kind of exploring what's good and what's bad. And it's nice because the character who's seen as good shows up doing all these things that you're like, oh, that's kind of crummy. And then the character that you think of as bad shows up attempting to heal and acting like a jerk too. Don't get me wrong, both of them are acting like jerks, and there are kids who are acting like jerks and kids who are trying really hard. It's a wonderful depiction of humanity and how people can do really good things and also mess up real bad and do things that are not okay. So how does this fit into Tantra? There is a philosophy, it's kind of like the underlying philosophy of Non-dual Tantra that says there is no such thing as good or bad. And that anything that you might label as bad is actually an opportunity for you to wake up more, or for someone else to wake up more. And when I say wake up, I mean build more self-awareness, build more presence, come closer and closer to an enlightened state. Because that's what Tantra is traditionally all about, reaching enlightenment. And enlightenment, it sounds like a big fancy thing. Really all it means is coming into contact with the reality of life without judgment or agenda. That's enlightenment. Being with the reality of this world. And I'm not saying like don't have feelings, don't respond, but there isn't the same quality of judgment and emotional upset that would happen for most people. And so every single time something bad happens, it's an opportunity for growth. That's the premise of this philosophy, or one of them. There are many, many different ways you can think about it, but this is one of the big underlying principles. There is no good or bad. It's a non-dual tradition. And so everything is meant to move you towards your most loving, open self. And so how does this fit in with Cobra Kai and all the things that I've been thinking about that might help you in your relationship? This is a really challenging idea to embody. It is a practice, truly, to try and get to a place where you look at all of life as attempts towards greater growth and love. When you see, I'm just going to use some examples from this show. When you see people attack each other for seemingly no reason. There was a moment where some people are breaking a car, and then there's a moment where people are just being dumb, like giving a teenager alcohol. Like there's these moments where you're like, oh God, don't do that, that's bad. And I'm saying you, but truly I was thinking these things like, don't do that. And I would stand by my assessment. I think those things are bad. However, what I like about this show and what it really helps like solidify, giving examples of non-dual beliefs is, oh yeah, those things are not in the highest good for all beings. True, that assessment is true. And does it make this person bad? No. What's actually happening is, this is a idea from Tantra, but I'm going to ground it in neuroscience. So in Tantra, they would call it samskara, mental impressions. All the mental impressions of the experiences I have had in my lifetime set me up to live in this world in a specific way. And so if I learned how to meet my emotions with curiosity and compassion and a containing boundary, I am way more likely to do things in this world that would be labeled as good. Whereas if I'm exposed to abuse, or I'm exposed to, let's just call it ignorance, like it is an ignorant thing to give a child alcohol. It's also abusive, but it's mainly ignorance. There's a scene where they talk about like the way to get a girl's attention is to throw popcorns at them. They love that stuff. They love jerks. Ignorance. If you have learned things based on your history that make it harder for you to show up in a loving, open-hearted, wise sort of way in this world, that is samskara. That is your mental impressions. That is just the reality of we humans learn through modeling. And depending on what we're exposed to, we're going to act in different ways. And so that brings us to the neuroscience piece. You are only capable of however much emotional intelligence you've been shown. And unfortunately, that is not something that we focus on culturally. And so there are a lot of people who are not very emotionally intelligent, which brings us to you and your relationship. So I imagine there are moments where you experience being triggered, upset, and you probably act in ways that you would not do in your whole brain state. So let's talk about brain science for a moment. Dan Siegel has this beautiful hand model that I think is brilliant, which, like, the hand is just a visual representation of my brain. This part would be the brainstem, which sits at the back and base of your skull. My thumb would be the subcortical area, so it sits in the center of your brain, and then the neocortex wraps around it. The neocortex is the part of us, particularly the prefrontal cortex, but the neocortex is the part of us that is able to emotionally regulate and make wise decisions in relationship and in life. The subcortical area is purely emotion driven, and it is mainly interested in your survival. This is the brain region along with the brain stem, but particularly here that's going to cause fight or flight behaviors, and also any sort of behaviors where you are, we call it flipping your lid often if you're a person who's learned interpersonal neurobiology, which is Dan Siegel's model. So flipping your lid is, I have disconnected from my prefrontal cortex. I am only operating from subcortical area, and I am allowing my emotions to control me. That's the reactive state of being in the world. I feel something and I react to it in whatever way I learned how. And for some people, it's collapsing and like being as small as they can be. That's more like a fawn response than collapse. Some people would collapse. Some people would fawn, like, I'm just going to be small, try and not be seen, go along with whatever the other person needs so that I don't get hurt. Some people run away, and some people fight. All of that is just based on whatever you learn to do to protect yourself in this world that is unfair and sometimes unkind and definitely dangerous. But it also does not always match the situation. It's just whatever we learned early is what we have available until we learn new things. And it's actually really hard to teach your brain new things, especially after a certain stage of development. You can, but from birth to 5, even in utero, actually, from in utero to 5 years old, that period of time is really setting you up on a nervous system level regarding how you're going to react to unpleasant, scary, hurtful things that happen to you. Based on the kind of care you received during that really formative developmental stage, you are going to be either more reactive to unpleasant situations and do things that maybe you would not choose to do in your right mind. Or you'll be able to pause and assess and see how you want to respond. And there's a big scale in between that. Like there's moments where maybe you lose it and moments where you can hold yourself back and go, wait a second, how do I actually want to act in this situation? And this brings us all back to the original idea, Non-dual Tantra, which says there is no good or bad, there's only growth. How can you hold yourself and ideally your partner too, who is going to mess up and act in ways that are reactive and not cool sometimes? How are you going to hold love and compassion and curiosity and an openness to the idea that they're not being bad, you're not being bad when you behave in ways that are problematic, not helpful, but instead you are reacting and there's work to do and there's an opportunity there for growth. There's an opportunity there for more emotional regulation, more emotional intelligence, and eventually wisdom. Eventually you come to a place where wise mind is how I've often heard this called in not only neuroscience, but also in contemplative practice traditions. Wise mind is the place you can eventually come to where you aren't reactive. You are living out of love and curiosity and compassion most of the time. These are big ideas. I know they are. Think about it in whatever way works for you. Like ground this into your knowledge about how the world works. For me, I ground it into my primary practices, which are emotional practices from therapy, neuroscience knowledge, because I love it, and Tantra. Like these are the spaces that I ground. How do I become more loving? How do I become more compassionate? How do I control the parts of me that could hurt others? Because they're there. So ground these ideas into whatever framework works for you so that you can have really loving, intimate relationships. Not ones based on reactivity and struggle and strife, but instead based on overcoming challenges and obstacles, because there will always be challenges and obstacles and hurtful moments and hurtful, painful, you know what I'm trying to say, and conflict and disagreements and differences in values. Like that's always going to be there in your relationship. The thing you can do is get better at responding to it with more kindness. I hope this was helpful. Please remember to like this video, subscribe to my channel, leave me comments because I love reading what you have to say, and I'll see you next time.